Everyone. So, so Donald Trump has done many horrendous things in his presidency. Perhaps I shouldn't say shocking, because unfortunately they come as little surprise. One of the things I rather admire about the United States is this robust attitude to free speech. Things that many people find offensive or inflammatory or whatever, and people are still allowed to say them unless it's a direct incitement to violence. So I'm almost a free speech fundamentalist. It's very worrying in the Republic of Ireland and the United Kingdom that free expression is being criminalized when it's something that the establishment finds unpalatable. But the United States is betraying its own legacy, particularly under Donald Trump, who's called the press enemies of the people and so on, who's a sworn enemy of free expression. It really is sickening. But what was announced recently is also very troubling, as that Mahmoud Khalil, who's been in the United States legally for years, who's studying at Columbia University, and indeed has permanent residency status in the United States, so very close to citizenship, that he's been arrested for exercising his rights. And I remind you that many of the provisions of the United States Constitution are not applicable not only to American citizens, but to anyone who's resident in the United States legally and in some cases illegally. If you're living in the United States, you have the right to a fair trial, even if you're not a US citizen. Even if you're there illegally, you would still get a fair trial. You couldn't be sent to jail without a trial. And so some of these rights, like free expression, apply to non-Americans when they're in the USA. Voting rights don't, but most rights do. Um, so Mr. Khalil has been arrested simply because he has spoken up for human rights, all these human rights provisions that the United States was instrumental in formulating, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, or the Geneva Convention, the Hague Convention, which the United States has ratified numerous human rights instruments, the Convention Against Torture, Inhuman and Degrading Treatments. The United States has often gratingly asserted its moral superiority and demand that others be brought to book. Indeed, the Rome Statute, which established the International Criminal Court, and the United States was a prime mover behind that. President Clinton signed it, but the United States Congress never. The Second World War in Rwanda, the former Yugoslavia, but it won't hold its own people to the same standard. But anyway, Mr. Khalil is an advocate of human rights, and that includes Palestinians. They're human beings too, and that may come to news to some Trumpists. So he's arrested in New York City because he displays the Palestinian flag. He's spoken out against the mass murder of 50,000 Palestinian civilians, often with weapons provided by the United States, with diplomatic cover by the United States, with the United States voting against United Nations resolutions to bring about a ceasefire, the United States providing intelligence, knowing precisely what's happening, providing military aid to Israel, already a very wealthy country. So this is accessoryship. The United States government knows exactly what's going on. They'll be informed by the United Nations, various humanitarian aid organizations, or Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and so forth. And despite knowing chapter and verse on the massive scale violence perpetrated against Palestinian civilians, the US government still provides weapons, knowing they will be used for the murder of civilians, which makes Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, as well as Trump and Vance, guilty of mass murder, of crimes against humanity. And so it goes on. So is those the ones that should be on trial, not Mr. Khalil? So anyway, Mr. Khalil has been arrested by the Immigration and Customs Enforcement. For what? For exercising his rights to protest, to demand the United States live up to his own standards, to defend human rights. And as Professor Michael Thaddeus at the University of Columbia correctly said, that Mr. Khalil is a political prisoner. He's taken into custody and he's lost a student visa. There's going to be the revocation of his green card and so on, because they said that he's led activities aligned to Hamas. The Department of Homeland Security claims that. That's not tested in court. I don't know whether there's a procedure to do so. But aligned to Hamas means, well, you don't want Palestinian civilians to be killed, neither does Hamas. I mean, also things would be aligned to Hamas. The US government wants a ceasefire in Israel. I suppose the US government's aligned to Hamas on that one. And actually, the United States government supports state terrorism, indeed commits state terrorism in the Middle East in many regions of the world, and so on. So Trump says that people like Mr. Khalil are terrorist sympathizers. I don't know any proof that's true. But even if it were true, but wait a second, sympathy can't be a crime. There's no such thing as thought crime, is there? It's good for your actions, not what goes on in your mind, and so forth. So it's really shocking. It's oppressive. It's a deprivation of his rights. So he's a Palestinian refugee. He's obviously a victim of the illegal occupation of Palestine, and he hasn't even been charged with any crime. So he's married to an American. She's 8 months pregnant. His child, an American child, will not be able to meet her or his father for some time. So it's really shocking and sickening, and that's what it's like. So now, I mean, anyone who speaks up for Palestinian rights is accused of anti-Semitism. Well, obviously, Palestinians are Semites too. So the major anti-Semitism in the world is the mass murder of Palestinians. Now, I don't want anyone to suffer violence. That includes Palestinians. That includes Israelis. It includes Muslims, Jews, Christians, people of any religion, people of no religion, people of any ethnicity. And I see where the barbarities have been so much meted out to Palestinian people. And yes, of course, I denounce the crimes committed against Israeli civilians on the 7th of October 2023. It was very worrying that the United States is betraying its own heritage. The unconstitutionality of what's happening, of persecuting people for a free expression, is very troubling, depriving them of their rights. And indeed, he had Jewish friends. So you see how there's been character assassination of him, people calling him a terrorist just because he wants freedom for Palestine. He recognizes they're human beings, and there's been the mass scale abduction of Palestinians. They've been severely beaten and tortured. You can see this on camera. Soldiers of the Israeli Defense Force beating up Palestinian civilians, knowing they're being filmed. And if that's what they do, when they know it's going to be broadcast, they will act even worse when they're not on camera, because of the impunity that they enjoy, that they're virtually never um, prosecuted by their own side. Large-scale looting from Palestinian homes, the willful desecration of mosques and cemeteries and so on, as well as the willful murder of so many Palestinian civilians, cutting off humanitarian aid, cutting off, electricity to a water works, so they have to drink contaminated water and no water at all, and this is going to kill a lot of people, particularly the elderly, the most vulnerable, infants, those who are very sick. Is very troubling, and it's absolutely nauseating, and it's evil, and it plays into the hands of America's enemies, that America would be more than complicit in such crimes against humanity. And Putin say, well, I'm no worse than the United States. And of course, what he says is not entirely wrong when he cites that example. So it's very tristful that we live in a world full of suffering and injustice, and there is so much evil, and the perpetrators of the most abominable crimes against humanity so often get away scot-free. A world where goodness is savagely punished and evil is lavishly rewarded.